The Calanthians, a small and delicate race, watched helplessly as the darkened skies signaled their doom. Their once vibrant cities, known for their remarkable achievements in biology and harmony with nature, now lay in ruins. The cosmic storm that tore through their world showed no mercy. They were not warriors, not built for resistance. Their lives had been centered around knowledge, healing, and balance, and now they faced complete annihilation. In the great halls of the Galactic Council, their fate was debated, though without much thought or care. The dominant species of the galaxy, strong, militaristic, and advanced, had little interest in what they saw as an insignificant race. The Calanthians had never contributed to military power, trade dominance, or conquest. What use did the galaxy have for them? They were seen as expendable, a fragile species that could be written off in the grand scheme of things. One by one, the council members made their decisions. Their collective indifference echoed through the chambers. "Let them die," they concluded. It was a matter of pragmatism. The resources required to rescue them were deemed too valuable, too scarce to waste on a species that offered no strategic benefit. To the council, saving them was an unnecessary burden. The Calanthians' pleas for aid were ignored, their distress calls fading into the void. Their fragile lives meant nothing to the wider galaxy, their existence considered inconsequential. The Calanthians prepared themselves for the end, accepting that no one was coming. They were alone in their suffering, abandoned. But far from the deliberations of the council, there was one species that was paying attention: humanity. Humans had long been underestimated in galactic circles, seen as newcomers to the galactic stage, not particularly advanced or influential. Yet, where others saw weakness, humanity saw value. Where others chose indifference, humans saw injustice. In a small briefing room aboard the human starship Resolute, Captain Reynolds and his crew observed the council's decision with a mixture of anger and disbelief. The Calanthians' home world was crumbling under the storm's fury, and yet no one cared. "They've sentenced an entire species to death," Reynolds muttered, shaking his head. His officers shared his sentiment. To them, it wasn't just a matter of strategy or politics, it was a moral outrage. "We can't just sit here and watch this happen." One of the officers spoke, their voice thick with frustration. "They're going to die if no one steps in." Another added, a sense of urgency creeping into the room. Reynolds leaned back, the weight of their responsibility heavy on his mind. He knew the risks involved. Defying the council's decision wasn't just a diplomatic issue, it could spark conflict. But humanity had never been one to simply follow orders when those orders meant abandoning the helpless. It was their nature to act, to help, to make a difference when no one else would. "We're going in," Reynolds declared, his voice firm. The crew around him nodded, already anticipating the unspoken command. It wasn't just about saving lives, it was about doing what was right, even when no one else would. The Resolute's engines roared to life as the ship charted a course for the storm-ravaged Calanthian homeworld. The mission was clear: evacuate as many of the survivors as possible and get them to safety. The crew worked tirelessly, preparing for the rescue mission ahead, knowing full well the dangers they would face. As they approached the planet, the crew got their first look at the destruction below. The once serene and beautiful world was barely recognizable, torn apart by the relentless storm. Lightning crackled across the sky, and debris floated in the chaotic winds. The Calanthians were scattered, hiding in the ruins of their cities, terrified and desperate. Their once orderly and peaceful society was now a place of fear and hopelessness. The humans landed their first shuttle near one of the few remaining Calanthian settlements. The sight of the human craft startled the survivors, their tiny forms huddled together in the shadows, unsure of whether this was a final attack or a last-minute salvation. When the humans emerged from the shuttle, the Calanthians didn't move at first, frozen in fear. Reynolds stepped forward, his hands raised to show they meant no harm. "We're here to help," he said gently, his voice carrying through the translator to the Calanthians' leader, a frail figure barely able to stand. There was a long pause as the Calanthians processed the words. And then, slowly, cautiously, they began to approach. The humans acted quickly, securing the area and beginning the evacuation process. The Calanthians were fragile, their small bodies trembling as they were led to safety. Some were too weak to walk, and the human medics moved swiftly to carry them aboard the shuttles. The storm loomed closer, the winds picking up with every passing minute, but the humans remained focused, working against the clock. In that moment, something changed in the eyes of the Calanthians. What had been fear was slowly replaced by hope, a hope they hadn't felt in what seemed like an eternity. These strange beings, the humans, had come for them when no one else would. They weren't just rescuing them, they were giving them a future, something the Calanthians had all but lost. The shuttles filled up, one after another, transporting the Calanthians to the safety of the Resolute. Each shuttle's departure brought with it a new sense of urgency as the storm began to intensify. The humans knew their window of time was closing, but they wouldn't stop, not until every last Calanthian they could find was brought to safety. And through it all, the Calanthians couldn't understand why. Why had the humans, these newcomers, risked so much to save a species that others had deemed unworthy? The answer, they would soon realize, lay in the very essence of what it meant to be human. Compassion, empathy, and a refusal to stand idly by in the face of suffering, these were the traits that set humans apart. They were traits that would soon come to change the fate of not just the Calanthians, but perhaps the galaxy itself. The humans had no time to celebrate as the rescue mission was just beginning. With the first few shuttles filled with Calanthian survivors, Captain Reynolds knew they had to work fast. The storm was growing stronger by the minute, its violent winds and lightning making it harder to navigate the planet's atmosphere. Each new landing became riskier, yet the humans pushed forward, determined not to leave anyone behind. Communication between the crew and the Calanthians remained difficult, but the message was clear: humanity was here to save them. The humans landed at several more devastated locations, finding groups of Calanthians in various states of distress. Some were barely holding on, their frail bodies struggling to survive the harsh conditions. But with every new group of survivors brought aboard the human shuttles, a glimmer of hope spread among them. It was becoming clear that these humans weren't just rescuers. They were the lifeline the Calanthians had never expected. The storm, however, wasn't making things easy. The atmosphere became increasingly unstable, and on one approach, a human shuttle was nearly lost. Buffeted by the storm's powerful winds, the shuttle's engines strained against the forces threatening to rip it apart. Inside, the crew worked frantically, adjusting controls and recalibrating systems to stabilize the craft. Failure wasn't an option. The crew managed to regain control just in time, their calm precision in the face of chaos showing the Calanthians a level of skill and determination they had never witnessed. As more Calanthians were brought aboard the Resolute, the scale of their suffering became more apparent. Many had been without proper food or shelter for days, and some were on the brink of death. Human medics worked tirelessly to tend to the most critical cases. While their medical technology was advanced, it was the human empathy that stood out. The way they spoke gently to the Calanthians, reassuring them despite the language barrier, conveyed a sense of care that transcended words. Among the Calanthians, their leaders and elders were in disbelief. They had always known humanity existed, but their interactions had been limited, mostly through trade and minor diplomatic exchanges. They had never expected such an outpouring of effort from a species the galaxy often viewed as a lesser power. To the Calanthians, humans were quickly becoming more than just another race in the galaxy. They were their saviors. Meanwhile, on the ground, the rescue efforts continued, with each new mission becoming more dangerous than the last. The human crew operated like clockwork, deploying multiple shuttles at once to cover as much ground as possible. They avoided detection from the galactic authorities, who had already written off the planet. To those watching from afar, it was as though the Calanthians had simply vanished, their story closed. But to the humans, this mission was far from over. In one of the more remote locations, the crew stumbled upon a large underground shelter. Inside, hundreds of Calanthians had gathered, huddled together, waiting for what they believed would be their final moments. When the humans arrived, they were met with a mixture of fear and confusion. But once again, Captain Reynolds stepped forward, extending a hand, and the sight of the human uniform sparked recognition. Slowly, the Calanthians emerged from their hiding places, their tiny forms trembling but hopeful. The humans wasted no time, organizing an efficient evacuation. They loaded the shuttles as quickly as possible, the storm's approach making it clear that this would be one of the last rescue opportunities. The Calanthians were grateful, their eyes filled with emotions they couldn't quite express, as they boarded the shuttles. For them, this was a second chance they had never thought they would receive. Back aboard the Resolute, the Calanthians found themselves in a new world, one of order, safety, and compassion. The humans had transformed part of their ship into a makeshift refuge, offering food, medical care, and shelter. For the Calanthians, who had lived in terror for so long, it was like stepping into a dream. Yet, even as the Calanthians were being saved, the humans knew the situation was precarious. The storm was worsening, and with each passing hour, the window for more rescues was closing. The human crew debated whether they should continue the mission or pull out entirely to ensure their own safety. But as they weighed the risks, one thing remained clear: there were still more Calanthians out there, still more lives to be saved. Reynolds made the call. They would keep going, no matter the cost. As the final stages of the rescue operation began, the human shuttles faced their toughest challenge yet. The storm had reached full force, and the atmosphere around the planet was nearly impassable. On their last few trips, the shuttles had to fight against the storm's massive electrical surges, dodging debris and maneuvering through violent winds. Several times it seemed the shuttles would be torn apart, but the human pilots, determined and skilled, managed to land against all odds. The final rescue effort saw the humans pulling survivors from a collapsing research facility, one of the last remaining Calanthian outposts. The facility had been integral to their biological research, and inside were some of their greatest scientists. For the Calanthians, losing these individuals would have meant losing centuries of knowledge. The human crew, realizing the importance of their mission, pressed on, racing against time to get them out. With the facility crumbling around them, the humans loaded the last of the Calanthians onto their shuttles. As they lifted off, the structure collapsed completely, engulfed by the storm. But the mission was a success. They had saved not only the lives of the Calanthians but also their legacy. The storm continued to rage as the last shuttle made its way back to the Resolute, but the ship, battered and tested, held steady. The crew, exhausted but triumphant, welcomed the final group of survivors aboard. They had done what no one else had been willing to do. As the dust settled from the rescue, the Calanthians found themselves safe aboard the Resolute, but there was still an air of uncertainty. They had lost so much, and even though they were alive, their future seemed fragile. For the Calanthians, their world had always revolved around their biological advancements and deep understanding of nature. Now, with their cities destroyed and their people scattered, they feared that everything they had worked for was lost. But humanity had other plans. As the human medics continued to treat the survivors, something unusual caught their attention. One of the doctors noticed that the Calanthians, despite their frail appearance, were recovering from their injuries far quicker than expected. Small wounds that had been treated just hours before were healing at an accelerated rate, and their vital signs seemed to stabilize far beyond what human medical knowledge would predict. Intrigued by these findings, the human medical team began running tests. What they discovered was extraordinary. The Calanthians possessed a unique biological trait that allowed them to regenerate tissue at a rapid pace. This ability wasn't just a natural defense mechanism. It was the result of centuries of biological engineering, carefully developed and refined by the Calanthians through their deep connection with nature. This regenerative trait wasn't something the Calanthians had shared with the wider galaxy. They had always been a peaceful species, focused on maintaining their own way of life, and had never seen the need to promote their scientific discoveries to the galactic powers. But now, with their population decimated and their survival hanging in the balance, this hidden trait became a lifeline not only for them but potentially for all of galactic civilization. The human scientists and medics were astonished. The implications of this discovery were vast. If humanity could harness and adapt this regenerative ability, it could revolutionize medicine across the galaxy. Injuries that had once been fatal could be healed in a matter of hours, and degenerative diseases that plagued many species could potentially be eradicated. The Calanthians had, unknowingly, been sitting on the key to one of the greatest medical advancements in history. For the Calanthians, this revelation was bittersweet. Their knowledge had always been a source of pride, something that defined their peaceful existence. Yet, they had never imagined that their work could extend beyond their own world. Now, faced with the reality of their situation, they saw an opportunity, perhaps the only way forward for their species. By working with the humans, they could not only rebuild but also contribute something invaluable to the galaxy. Aboard the Resolute, a quiet but powerful alliance began to form. The Calanthian biologists, some of the brightest minds in their species, collaborated with the human scientists. They worked together to explore the full potential of the Calanthian regenerative abilities. The humans provided advanced technology and equipment, tools that the Calanthians had never had access to, while the Calanthians shared their centuries of biological knowledge. The bond between the two species deepened, built not on military might or political power, but on mutual respect and a shared goal. It was a remarkable partnership. As they worked, the Calanthians marveled at the humans' adaptability and determination. The humans, in turn, were in awe of the Calanthians' deep understanding of the natural world, realizing that their supposed weakness had been misunderstood by the rest of the galaxy. This was not a race of fragile beings. They were innovators, capable of transforming life itself. Humanity's role in this discovery wasn't just about benefiting from the Calanthians' knowledge. It was about ensuring that this knowledge was preserved and shared for the greater good. The humans knew that they could use this newfound technology to give the Calanthians a future. With their help, the Calanthians could rebuild, not just as survivors but as contributors to a brighter, healthier galaxy. But this alliance wasn't without its risks. The Calanthians' regenerative trait, now exposed, could make them a target. Other species, especially those driven by conquest and power, might seek to exploit this biological treasure. The humans were aware that their decision to protect and assist the Calanthians could have significant political ramifications. Yet, they chose to press on, knowing that this was bigger than any potential conflict. The Calanthians, once viewed as weak and insignificant by the galactic powers, were now on the brink of becoming key players in a new age of medical advancement. And it was humanity, often underestimated themselves, who had given them this chance. Together, they were preparing to take the next step, to bring this discovery to the galaxy at large, to show that strength could come in many forms. The joint human-Calanthian team began developing a plan to safely introduce this regenerative technology to the galaxy. They knew it had to be done carefully, ensuring that the Calanthians weren't exploited in the process. It wasn't just about the science. It was about protecting the species that had given so much without asking for anything in return. The humans took it upon themselves to act as the Calanthians' protectors, ensuring that their knowledge would be shared responsibly. As the work continued, a sense of hope spread among the Calanthians. What had once been a desperate fight for survival was turning into something much greater. They were no longer the helpless species left to die. They were now partners in shaping the future of the galaxy. This collaboration had proven something important, that sometimes, the smallest and most overlooked species could hold the key to the greatest advancements. And it was humanity, with their compassion and willingness to act, that had made it possible. Together, the humans and the Calanthians were preparing to share their discovery with the galaxy, knowing that they were on the verge of something truly extraordinary. The future was no longer a question of survival for the Calanthians. It was a future filled with potential, a future where they and humanity would stand together, not as saviors and the saved, but as equals, united by their shared belief in the value of life and the power of knowledge. Word of the humans' actions spread quietly at first, whispers among the few species still paying attention to the fate of the Calanthians. But as more details emerged, those whispers turned into shock and disbelief across the galactic powers. The humans hadn't just saved a species the galaxy had written off, they had uncovered something that could shift the balance of power. The Calanthians' regenerative ability was no longer a secret, and it didn't take long for the implications to sink in. A species once deemed weak and insignificant now held the key to something invaluable. The Galactic Council, having initially turned its back on the Calanthians, was forced to acknowledge the situation. Some members were enraged. The Council had made a decision, one that humanity had blatantly defied. Worse, by allying with the Calanthians and safeguarding their discovery, humans had positioned themselves as protectors of a power that could disrupt the established order. This was not something the Council, or its most influential members, could ignore. On the other hand, there were those who watched humanity's actions with newfound respect. They had seen a species step up where others had failed. Humanity, despite its relative youth in galactic politics, had shown a strength that was neither military nor economic. It was a strength rooted in compassion, and a refusal to leave the helpless behind. This wasn't just about technology or biology anymore. It was about who the galaxy would choose to follow, whose values would shape the future. As tensions began to simmer among the Council members, the Calanthians found themselves under a spotlight they had never sought. Their survival had once been in question, but now they were at the center of a potential conflict. The larger, more aggressive species viewed them as pawns, something to be controlled, something to be taken advantage of. But the Calanthians had no desire for power. They only wanted to rebuild, to continue their work in peace. Humanity's role as their protector became more crucial than ever. Captain Reynolds and his crew understood the gravity of the situation. They had rescued the Calanthians from the storm, but now they had to protect them from something far more dangerous: greed and manipulation from the galaxy's most powerful factions. The Calanthians were no longer seen as fragile. They were a resource, and that made them valuable in ways that put them at risk. The humans didn't back down. Despite the political fallout, they made it clear that any attempt to exploit the Calanthians would be met with resistance. They had fought for the Calanthians' lives, and they would fight just as fiercely to defend their right to exist without being used by others. This wasn't just about a scientific discovery, it was about the integrity of life and the responsibility that came with protecting it. Behind closed doors, negotiations began. Some species, intrigued by the potential medical advancements the Calanthians' biology offered, sought peaceful partnerships. They approached humanity and the Calanthians with offers to collaborate, promising to share resources in exchange for access to the regenerative technology. These species were cautious, understanding that any misstep could lead to a larger conflict, but they saw an opportunity for mutual benefit. They recognized that the galaxy was changing, and that change, led by humans and Calanthians, could be something positive. But not everyone was willing to cooperate. A faction of more aggressive species, led by an empire that had long dominated through military strength, viewed the Calanthians as a direct threat to their power. They refused to accept that such a small, seemingly weak race could hold such influence. To them, the Calanthians represented a challenge to the natural order of things, and they wouldn't allow that. Tensions reached a boiling point when this faction made a move to seize the Calanthians by force. Ships from the Empire were spotted near the Calanthian refugee fleet, and a message was sent: surrender the Calanthians, or face the consequences. It was a blatant act of aggression, one that could have ignited a full-scale war. Humanity, however, stood firm. They knew they couldn't fight the Empire alone, but they weren't about to back down either. In a bold move, they called on the other species of the galaxy, those who had watched from the sidelines, unsure of where they stood. Humanity asked them a simple question: would they allow the weak to be trampled, or would they stand for something greater? The response was swift. Species that had once viewed the Calanthians as unimportant, as a species with no place in galactic politics, began to side with humanity. They saw the opportunity to reshape the galaxy into something better, something where compassion and cooperation took precedence over conquest and domination. It wasn't about the Calanthians' biological abilities anymore. It was about a new vision for the future. A coalition formed, with humanity and the Calanthians at its center. Together, they stood against the Empire, their combined forces making it clear that any attack would be met with overwhelming resistance. The Empire, recognizing that it was outmatched, retreated, leaving the Calanthians in peace, at least for now. The threat of war had been averted, but the message was clear: the galaxy had changed, and those who once held power through fear and strength were no longer in control. For the Calanthians, this marked the beginning of a new chapter. They were no longer the helpless species left to die, they were partners in a new alliance, one built on mutual respect and shared values. Their regenerative technology, once a hidden treasure, was now a gift they would share with the galaxy. But it would be shared on their terms, with humanity by their side, ensuring that their knowledge was used for the good of all, not for the greed of a few. Humanity had proven something that day. They weren't the most advanced species in the galaxy, nor the most powerful. But they had something that no other species had: the courage to stand up for those who couldn't defend themselves, and the wisdom to use their influence to create a better future. In the end, it wasn't just about saving the Calanthians. It was about showing the galaxy what it meant to be truly strong.